What are your best tips for an intuitive cut if you are currently intuitive eating at maintenance? I have some thoughts. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to another Q&A day. And as a reminder, we are here to be your guides in all things health and fitness. The world, the internet, the social medias are full of a whole lot of garbage. Some of it's great, some of it's not. So we're here to filter through that, cut through the noise, and deliver the no-nonsense applications that you can take as you see fit to start changing your life. Take it away.
So, intuitive cut. Can you lose body fat without tracking macros? Yes. Will it take a lot longer than if you were to track at least protein and calories? Yes, but it's possible. And I think it's really only going to be successful for those of you who have a solid baseline of nutrition. You've tracked before, you're kind of hovering at maintenance, you eat pretty much, mostly whole foods. Overall, you have a good baseline of all the areas, right? And I feel like this could also be good for those of you who don't have a good baseline. And I know that might be a shocking statement. So if you're somebody who maybe you've never tracked macros, you are currently eating a lot of highly ultra processed foods as most of your intake throughout the day. If you simply started eating more whole foods and swapping out some of those very high processed foods for more whole foods, I would bet you probably would lose some body fat over the course of a few weeks, months, if you are starting from scratch. Do you agree?
Yeah, entirely.
Now with that, it will be harder for those of you who are who have tracked before. Maybe you are eating mostly whole foods right now. You eat clean, quote unquote. We still hear a lot of that. If you're able to make some swaps and kind of think proactively and kind of think in the mindset of eating a little bit more higher volume, less calorically dense foods, can you see progress? Yeah, sure. But if you get to the point where it does feel like you're spinning your wheels and you aren't seeing progress as efficiently as you want to, tracking even just protein and calories can get you so much farther than nothing at all.
Yeah, I agree with both of those fronts. Myself, I took the first thing that you mentioned. Like, I wasn't in dire need of shedding a ton of body fat and I didn't feel like tracking. So I took the intuitive approach of just, visualizing or viewing, using my eyeballs to cut down portion sizes of carbs and fats, maintaining protein portion sizes, but whatever I was eating for carbs, whatever I was eating for fats, that portion size got smaller, making sure I was always a little bit hungry, like not starving, but just a little bit hungry. And then primarily whole food, nutrient dense options. Like that's the common denominator across the board, regardless. Doing all those things, crushing your workouts, focusing on sleep, like you can do it intuitively. Like you don't have to track to see progress, but you do have to be more patient. And if you do hit a speed bump, like you will probably have to track at some point to get over that hump if you're really focused and die hard on seeing that fat loss.
With that said, though, I do want to clarify that you can overeat the whole foods and gain fat. Like that still matters. Your calorie intake still matters.
But it is harder to do.
It's harder to do. And I mean, it depends on the situation. So like Josh said, if you are at a place where you're not seeing progress nearly as fast as you want, it might be worth tracking for a couple. I mean, you don't have to do it forever. I think a lot of the people who struggle with the mindset of tracking macros feel like they have to do it forever and that they can't then transition off of it. If you have a plan in place to transition away from tracking that supports you eating at maintenance, tracking shouldn't be as overwhelming as it is. You should be able to approach it from the perspective of, this is allowing me to hit my goals efficiently and I can scale back from it when I do feel like I'm at a good place.
I'll also circle back and say, and this kind of ties in with the second part you said, just cutting down on the ultra processed stuff. When there are certain periods I go through where I do have that sweet tooth and I wasn't as on point with, making that fruit ice cream, the frozen fruit ice cream, or, one tiny little bar, not a bar, but like the row off a bar of like dark chocolate, no added sugars or whatever. Like that's my usual go-to. Or honestly, this is going to sound really freaking weird. But the past week, re-upping on that sourdough bread. Like my dessert for like 4 days in a row was 2 slices of that dipped in olive oil in their seasoned vinaigrette. Like it was an Italian Naples seasoning. That was my dessert after dinner, and I love it. Like that quenches, it's not a sweet tooth, but that tasty something, the olive oil, seasoned vinegar, and the sourdough. Like that was my go-to. Now that said, when I get stuck in a little bit of a rut and whatever, I have Yasso bars for 4 days in a row. Like I do notice a significant difference in just how lean I am waking up in the morning. Like when I'm focusing on stopping eating after dinner, I'm not having that sweet tooth thing in regards to like a Yasso bar, even though it's quote unquote healthier. It's Greek yogurt. It's still a bunch of added sugars. It's still something that I don't need on a regular basis. Once in a while, again, not demonizing. Once in a while, fine. But when that's a staple for like a week for me, I notice that I'm not quite as lean. And then going back to finishing out my day the quote unquote right way, that might be triggering. I don't mean it in that way. I'm just using this for simple verbiage. I am significantly leaner throughout the day, but I notice it like when I wake up in the morning. That's when I really notice it. So cutting out the ultra processed stuff. Yes, it's Greek yogurt. Yes, it's better than a 50-gram sugar bowl of ice cream or like Snickers bar or whatever, insert frozen treat here. It's better, but it's not a whole food. It's still that special treat that shouldn't be done on a daily basis.
You know, context matters and where you're at matters. If you are somebody who is eating a big bowl of Haagen-Dazs ice cream or Ben & Jerry's every single night right now,
even a small bowl,
and you swap to the Yasso bar, I would argue that you will still see progress making that small shift. When you get to the point where the rest of your day is also looking much better, you're eating more whole foods, you don't really feel like you need that Yasso bar anymore, you can also swap that out for something else. So I think your point in sharing that is context matters. It's not going to be like certain foods do not make you fat. Certain foods are not going to cause fat loss, but you have to look at the entire big picture of your day. You have to look at where your current nutritional standing is, where your wisdom is, where your education is, and make changes moving forward from there. What works for one person isn't going to necessarily be the key for anyone else, but there might be other steps you can take to see progress that don't require tracking.
Agreed. Progress is going to be different. It's going to look different for each individual.
All right, these 2 questions we got after we recorded last week's Q&A, so we'll dive into those from our Facebook group. Good morning. I'm getting married in December and I really want to add more definition to my back and my delts. While I realize I'm on a crunch time and a lot goes into play with training and nutrition to hit goals, with that being said, looking ahead to October, which would be better, build or hybrid for me to follow and really focus on those upper body goals? So I think, if you have the time to do maybe slightly longer workouts, go for build. You're going to get a little bit more volume in there. You really want to maximize your muscle gain and really dial things in until your wedding. I would personally go for build if you can. If you're limited on time and you're currently not doing too much as far as lifting and you just aren't consistent across the board and you still want to make sure you have time for cardio too, then do hybrid. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other. It's whatever you can be more consistent with as far as, hitting all of the days. But build has 2 is hybrid upper lower split too? So they're both upper lower splits.
Build is just the additional optional day, right?
Day, that is a full body split. So you'll get a little bit more volume in there. And the workouts are going to be a little bit longer than hybrid.
That said, I don't entirely agree with you saying more volume is necessarily going to be better. I think it's individual. And I think if you are like, I'm not necessarily just doing Evolve Hybrid to save time. Like I'm seeing the best results I've seen in a very long time because I'm recovering better, energy is higher, and I'm going way more intense. Even though a lot of times I'm doing supersets, I'm doing circuits. I hate the word circuits. Giant sets, like I've talked about here in the last few episodes. My intensity is all the way up, and I'm seeing the best progress because of that. So if you haven't done Evolve Hybrid and you're in a place where you want to experiment with it, like you can still dive in with that. And again, one won't necessarily be better than the other. If you want to focus on a bit more traditional, so there's a bit more volume in build, and roll with that and then experiment with hybrid afterwards, obviously roll that way. But either one you do, just a little additional context for focusing specifically on back and delts. You can also reorder the movements. So you can start your upper body days with back and then delts and then fill in the rest as you go throughout it. So you're hitting it with the highest amount of intensity without any fatigue being built up. that's just based on preference. Again, we're not going to spot reduce when it comes to fat loss, but you can prioritize gains in certain areas based on order and volume and intensity. So that would be one little thing you could do regardless of whatever program you dive into. Just prioritize back and shoulders. Those movements go first and then fill in the rest.
Yeah, and then obviously as far as looking toned and looking more jacked in your wedding dress, nutrition is going to be the biggest factor as far as losing some fat on top of that muscle. So make sure that is also where it needs to be to support where you are right now. All right, long-time lifter here. I was doing builds, but I switched to move this year to incorporate running. I've been eating at maintenance calories, so 0.9 grams of protein per pound of body weight all year. And scale weight is the same, but I'm seeing an increase in abdominal fat. Lifts are feeling good and increasing. I'm almost 42, so perimenopause is likely contributing. I decided to move back to build so I have more strength days to see if this helps. Any other advice before a deficit this fall or winter?
Like we kind of talked about off the top, look at your diet, do a little reflection and see if there are some ultra processed things you can remove without a crazy overhaul, without worrying about even going into a deficit period. The first thing I would do is just diet refinement. Do an honest assessment. How much of what I'm eating is coming from ultra processed foods? Can I go a week with eating nothing but whole foods? Let's see how I feel. Let's see how I look. And can I just continue that method? People are going to view that as extreme. I don't. It's the natural way of being. Like we talk about normal is not optimal. Like you don't want to be normal nowadays. That's very, very, very suboptimal. So it's not extreme to say, oh, you should eat just whole foods. Like if you want to see where you're at and give yourself a true, baseline to work from without having to reduce calories. That's the key thing there, because you're going to maintain muscle better. If you can eat at quote unquote maintenance and just focus on prioritizing, and for at least a week, just go straight whole foods, see how you feel, see how you look. And then there's a good chance there's nothing else you're going to have to change.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting scenario here. I would say, I don't know how accurately you're tracking right now in maintenance either. So sometimes in maintenance, we can get a little bit just, I don't want to use the word lazy, but just comfortable. And as humans, we are naturally going to overestimate how much we're actually consuming. So unless you're tracking, even if you went a week, like do what Josh said for a week, incorporate more of those whole foods. Maybe the following week or a couple weeks after that, you do track a little bit more intensely, just to make sure you really are where you want to be as far as that maintenance range, and then kind of take it from there. But I think you'll be happy once you enter your deficit. It sounds like training is going well. It sounds like you're doing a lot of the right things. So sometimes it's just that tiny little bit of refinement that we need, or maybe like over the course of the year, your daily steps decrease a little bit, even just a tiny amount on a daily basis. Like the little things add up over time, and they're often things we don't really notice are or aren't happening. So just audit what you're currently doing in all areas and then make changes slowly from there, rather than diving headfirst into a big deficit because you're concerned about fat gain.
We hit on this big time in the last episode, but focusing on all the little things, like you said, it's not an overhaul for anything that you're trying to do. It's not a lifestyle overhaul for 90% of you. It's just making better decisions and developing higher quality habits.
All right. Rapid fire to answer. I think we have like 8 more. We did that one. I have an obvious lack of engagement on one side when training unilateral movements. Any advice?
Start with that side.
Start with that side. Really focus on engaging that side and pushing at the right intensity as far as weight goes. And then don't progress the other side a lot faster just because it can handle more, if that makes sense.
Just match it.
Yep. How to not lose all of my muscle mass postpartum. So I think a lot of women are concerned about that like initial 6-week period where you're not really doing anything as far as like intense exercise, sometimes longer than that. The biggest thing is making sure you're consuming enough protein and calories to support not just breastfeeding if you're doing that, but just recovery in general. The last thing you want to do is go right into a deficit early postpartum or undereat because you're not doing as much exercise. So that you can do gentle movement. You can do like even just going for a walk every day is still enough to stimulate your muscles. So it's not like you're just laying on the couch all day, every day. Like move your body in gentle ways. That's one of the reasons why my postpartum program you can start it as early as week 1, because it's not necessarily exercise and the idea that we're exerting ourselves, it's going to help with your healing, and it's going to help keep your body mobile and keep those muscles active in the appropriate way for that phase. So you're not going to lose it. You're not going to lose as much as you think, but also if you're moving even in small amounts that aren't necessarily exercise, you're doing a lot better for your muscles than not anything at all. Is there a deload week in the SDE app?
Nope.
Why?
One, we update these every 4 weeks. So you can actually take your deload week. You can cut the volume in half for a certain program. But given that we update these every month, we don't want to waste a week of that month with a deload week. Like, you can take that on your own, and we keep 2 months of a program active so that you don't lose access to it. So if you go into the newest month, but you take an extra week, like, that won't disappear. You can still continue to follow that, and then the following month in the correct progression. 2 is deloads are pretty overrated.
Unless you've gone on deloads over the years.
Unless you go through periods of overtraining, like scheduled overtraining, where you need that adaptation to kind of recover from with an undertraining week, like, you don't need to deload. And I don't agree with an overtraining week. So it's not how we program, especially in the new program, Evolve Hybrid, our new featured program. Again, that is built to maximize your recovery and minimize fatigue, so you feel so much better. You can do it in a much more efficient amount of time, and there's different ways to stagger that. But you kick ass at a very high intensity, and you recover very well, so a deload is completely irrelevant.
Preach. All right. Is there a beginner class on macros? Every time I try it, I'm so lost and overwhelmed.
Macros Guide, sdevolution.com.
Yep. It's a freebie. So download it, learn the basics, and just start tracking. Honestly, the best thing
it's also in the app, isn't it?
It is in the app. The best thing you can do is just start tracking your current intake and kind of just see where you're coming in at, and try to, when you're tracking and when you're weighing your food, it's not just blindly doing these things and eating it. It's kind of taking an assessment of each meal. What does this meal look like? Do I have enough protein in this meal? Is this a super high fat meal? And you're just kind of using each time you track and weigh as a learning experience to learn about how you've been eating, and then take that with you moving forward. But as far as like the basics and what to focus on, protein, carbs, fat, fiber wise, go download the freebie.
And this is a great example of something like a free tool, one of our freebies, versus coaching, where, if you're using a tool online, if you're using our guide, it's a general calculation. It's a generic calculation to get you close. And then you're going to be required to track at that number to see if it's actually your maintenance. Where coaching, we're going to take, if you've been tracking anything, we can take that into account. Then we take the data and tell you what your maintenance actually is. So it's, again, that shortcut of getting you directly to that place, versus do the calculation on your own, or study it, investigate what this should be, attempt to follow up, and then figure out if that was actually correct for you or not, and make the adjustment.
Is fat loss doable while breastfeeding? Yes, it is. I think a lot of people have this idea that fat loss while breastfeeding is like this entire separate process that's way different than fat loss at any other time, when it's really the same process. Like, the only way we can lose body fat is being in a calorie deficit. How much of that deficit we're in will depend on the individual, and how much you can be in while breastfeeding will also be individual. So some people, like, I brought so many clients through fat loss phases while breastfeeding in the earlier days, and by earlier, no sooner than 3 months postpartum. I don't recommend fat loss any sooner than that, just because you're going through a huge life transition. Your stress is high, your sleep is probably crap, you're recovering still. So the 3 month mark is really the earliest I would suggest it, if not later, more like 6 months. But it's doable. You just have to figure out where that level is for you. And there's no formula for it. It's honestly different for every single client that I brought through a fat loss phase while breastfeeding, is finding that sweet spot of how much can I push this? But also, my other kind of hot take on this is that not everyone needs to be in a calorie deficit while breastfeeding. Like, most of the time we need to be focusing on, once we're like gaining our fitness back and getting back to a higher level of fitness, is gaining muscle and really improving performance. You're going to see body composition changes just by pushing it more in the gym. So I didn't do like an official cut or fat loss phase with Cora, and my body completely shifted through the first 6 months because I focused on the basics, my daily habits, eating mostly whole foods, making sure I was eating enough protein. I started at like 2,800 calories per day in the early postpartum days, and it came down a little bit as my milk supply regulated, but I didn't do like an official, oh, I'm doing a cut phase right now. Like it was never like that. So you can see a lot of progress when you implement all of these things that we talk about on the reg. I have a question about how many days to lift. I do a 6-day split, and I've read that it's harder to build muscle and you should do 3 days. But I don't have time to do everything in one session, and I like 6 days. Keeps my motivation up.
Any article you're reading that says don't do this, you need to do that, just literally delete it, crumple it up, throw it in the garbage can. It's all bullshit. It's made to be sexy for marketing appeal. That is it. If you are doing well with 6 days, you can't build like whoever wrote that is a moron. Like I usually don't call people out, but what an idiot. You can't build muscle with 6 days. How many bodybuilders are training 6 days a week? Like that's the norm for bodybuilders. So A, sit the fuck down. B, you can build muscle on 3 days a week. You can build muscle on 4 days a week, on 5 days a week, on 6 days a week. You probably can't do it on 7 days a week because you need recovery, and nobody would recommend that anyway. Unless this weird guy who thinks you can only train 3 days a week to build muscle has got some weird things he wants to throw out there. But if you're seeing progress, if you're getting stronger, if you have 6 days and that's what fits, your schedule because of breaking those exercises down, great.
And it sounds like she's happy. Her motivation is high. Like
Yep.
That's a win. Like most
that
people
said too, but just to kind of that is a win, but just to kind of scale it back a bit further, that doesn't mean you need to continue training 6 days a week at that high volume. Like we just talked about with hybrid, there's different ways to do things where you can scale volume down, ramp up intensity, and see great results in a shorter period of time. So can you do it the way you're doing it? Sure. And if you're seeing great results and you feel great and you enjoy what you're doing, keep doing that. If you want to scale back days and volume, that's available to you too.
Yep.
But there's no such thing as one right way to do that. One more time, whoever wrote that's an idiot.
All right, last question of today. How did you manage breastfeeding hunger? I lost most of my pregnancy weight 2 weeks postpartum and started gaining slowly after that because I don't sleep enough and eat all the time to support my milk production. I eat over 3,000 calories a day. There is a lot of fat and a lot of carbs/sugar because those things are quick. I don't have time to sit down and chomp a chicken breast, and the baby has dairy sensitivity, so whey is out. I have a lot of thoughts here. Number one, getting back to your pre-pregnancy weight, it's irrelevant because you can get back to your pre-pregnancy weight and look completely different than you did pre-pregnancy. A lot of that is just water weight. A lot of that is blood loss. A lot of that is just all of the different things that are occurring when you grow a baby. You just birthed a baby. So a lot of that is just your body regulating post-birth. That doesn't mean that you're going to look the same because oftentimes if you didn't train throughout pregnancy, like you lost muscle mass or you've gained some body fat, your body composition is just shifted. So that doesn't really matter in this sense. As far as number one, I'm glad you're eating enough to support milk production. That's important and something that a lot of women struggle with. But eating enough protein is going to be key. If you're constantly hungry and you're telling me you're eating a lot of like high carb, high fat, sugary foods, that's why you're constantly hungry. You're not eating enough protein. You're probably not eating enough whole food, so fiber is probably lacking. That's why hunger is up despite you eating 3,000 calories per day. So yes, is it harder to sit down and chomp a chicken while you're feeding a baby? Sure, but I would argue it's no different than eating anything else if that chicken is prepped. So number one, I would advise you to strap the baby in a little carrier and do some meal prep. I lived off of chicken, meatballs, eggs. You cooked a lot of my postpartum meals, but we never make anything fancy. We always have protein readily available in the fridge. So even things like tuna packets, I'm trying to think what else. I do have protein bars. There are vegan protein and protein bars out there. If you can't
yogurt,
have
granola,
dairy,
nuts, berries.
But there's options is my point. And it doesn't always have to be just sitting down and cooking a whole chicken breast and then having to season it and make it special into this fancy meal. Like sometimes you just got to do what you got to do when it comes to protein intake. And if you're struggling right now, you got to do what sounds easiest for you. So maybe that's batch prepping a few days worth of the meatballs. And I honestly eat those cold sometimes as a little snack because they're just so easy. So figuring out what's going to be an easy option and not just relying on carbs and sugar and high fat food just because that is easy.
I will say what is thought of as like a fancy meal or whatever to create really isn't that difficult. So I'm not a huge fan of just like straight chicken breast. Like I don't enjoy chicken breast unless it's like we make like buffalo chicken breast or something like that. But if you just within your prep, throw together some peppers, some onions, some mushrooms, or maybe you've got a salsa blend, you've got chopped up onions and tomatoes and peppers, and you throw some olive oil on that on top of some rice. Like that is delicious. Throw seasoning on top of that, and it's like it's got its own special dressing.
So ready rice, you can microwave it in 90 seconds. We get the Seeds of Change packets from Stop and Shop. They're pretty affordable. It's rice.
Dice up some chicken breast.
Dice up some chicken. You can
and
throw it
saute
in a pan.
some veggies.
You can even throw the chicken in the pan with the veggies and just do it all at once. And I would do this
Delicious.
while wearing Cora, or if she was taking a snooze in her DockATot right next to me on the counter or on the couch. So my eyes were on her.
If you're gagging on seasoned like salt, pepper, garlic on some grilled chicken breast, like I feel you there. It's going to take longer. That versus the concoction we just explained takes the same amount of time, but it's way easier to get down.
Yeah. Well, she said she didn't have time to eat the chicken, but
well, if she's gagging, if she's saying it takes her a long time to eat chicken, like I can see myself taking more time to eat just dry ass chicken versus something like that.
But you have to make it easy and understand that there's going to be some sacrifice and some give or take here, but cooking a higher protein whole food meal doesn't have to be as time consuming as many people think it is. So that is it on the Q&A this week. Rapid fire. Don't forget, if you have questions, to join our Facebook group if you're a member, or even if you're not a member of the app. You can join the group and ask questions there. We put up a post every week. If you want to be anonymous and ask an anonymous question, there's a link in the show notes. You can submit that at any time.
And remember, guys, this is a free podcast. We appreciate you for being here. Our goal, our mission is to help as many people as possible, whether they ever work with us one-on-one or not, in any capacity or not. So if this is something you got value from, if you continue to listen and you have not left a review, we ask that you please do so. Again, we appreciate it very much. It helps us with these algorithms. If you're watching it on YouTube, like it. You can drop a quick comment, ask a question there, share it, screenshot it, share it on your social media, tag us. We appreciate all of that, and leaving us a review in the app stores if you are listening to it on Apple or on Spotify. Makes a huge difference with reach. And again, this is a community. We're doing this as a team. As a member of our team, you are helping us expand the audience. And every time that you share it or you leave a review, someone else is going to be able to gain insight and change their life because of it. So, through awareness, you create change. Mantra 1, be the change. Mantra 2 of this podcast. So creating that ripple effect, allowing us to reach more people, helping us in this journey here. So that's all that we ask. This is free content that we love putting out for you guys. But to be able to continue doing this, we do need to make sure the show is growing, and that is the number one way to do so. Where can they find you?
I'm at Alessandra Skutnik.
I'm at Josh Skutnik.
Everything else is linked in the show notes.